really pleased to be here today with our guest, Thom Powers. Many of you know of him or know him as from one of the many, many positions he has had over the years as most recently as our documentary head of the Toronto International Film Festival, but also as one of the founders and artistic director of DOC NYC, a podcast host of Pure Nonfiction, the originator of a title I always love, Stranger Than Fiction, but also most recently a writer of the book Mondo Documentary. And it was like a perfect, we always encourage shameless self-promotion here. It was a perfect excuse to get Thom here because I consider him a friend, and I'd love to. The book, you feel like you know Thom much better after you read it, and I really wanted you folks to get to know Thom in a way, deeper than just in a professional sense. The book is a collection of his 20 years of programming at TIFF. Not all the films that played there, not all the documentaries that played there, but the ones that he was sort of primarily responsible for curating. His program notes are great. They actually remind me of Pauline Kael's notes in the New Yorker, her short program notes. He's a terrific writer, and he really conveys his love for documentary through them. So I couldn't recommend the book more highly, just as a way of educating yourself in the last 20 years of great documentaries. But he has about a 20-page introduction that talks about his path to TIFF and how he came to write the book. And that's really what I want to focus mostly on today. I'll be moderating the first hour. We'll leave the last half hour open for your questions, and we can get into, that might be a really good time to talk more about the state of the industry today and where it is now, the problems and where it might be heading. But I just want to start with by reading the beginning of I want to read the first paragraph of the introduction for Thom's book. You call this a book of a collection of love letters. These film descriptions were written over the course of 20 years of my job as a documentary programmer at TIFF. Mondo Documentary compiles the more than 350 titles that I've presented. Each entry is an attempt to distill in a few hundred words why the film captured my heart. My wish is presenting them here is to open your eyes to new discoveries so that you may also fall in love. And I love that because we documentary filmmakers have this notion of programmers as these, gatekeepers that keep us from getting exhibited, and can be seen as
the people who say no, mostly.
Exactly, the people who say no, and the evil people who say no. And in my experience, every festival program I know of got there because they love movies. And so I want to talk about how you evolved into this, your path. starting from Detroit. I mean, let's begin there.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, thank you to everyone for joining this. D-Word has been an essential part of my career, dating back to the years when I was a filmmaker, and used it as an invaluable resource to get questions answered and commiserate and take inspiration from my peers. So it's a constant marvel to me, Doug, that you and your whole team of people do this year after year on on top of your other careers. So I feel very much at home in this community, and so thank you for having me. The question you asked about where my first love of documentary came from is something that I talk about in the introduction of the book, and it began growing up in the suburbs of Detroit, and looking for something else that was a pre-internet era in the 1980s when I was going to high school in Detroit. And so if you wanted to, seek out communities that weren't otherwise easily available to you, the movie theater was one place to do that. And for me, the main portal was the Detroit Institute of Arts, known as the DIA, that has a grand movie palace, over 1,000 seats, red velvet curtains, a balcony. It remains to this day probably my favorite place to watch a movie anywhere in the world. And the Detroit Film Theater, which is the program that runs at the DIA, was started over 50 years ago by Elliot Wilhelm, its curator, who still runs it to this day. He was the first person I ever saw on stage presenting a movie when I was 17 or 18 years old. It wasn't, and even seeing him on stage, I don't think gave me the idea that film curation could be a job. It just seemed to be, something very singular that he got to do. I write in my introduction that it's a good thing that I didn't wait around trying to do his job, because he's still doing it and very well. Going to that, and so when a film would play at the DIA, it would play maybe one night, or possibly the full weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But mostly there was a real sense that if you weren't there that night, you might never see this movie again. And some of the films that I saw in that theater, documentaries that really opened my eyes to what documentary filmmaking could be, include the film 17 by Jeff Krimes and Joel DeMott, who just passed away this year. 28 Up by Michael Apted, and Hotel Terminus, The Life and Times of Klaus Barbie by Marcel Ophuls. Those three films I saw within 2 years span. Over the years in that theater, I would also come to see American Dream by Barbara Koppel, who was in maybe in this room virtually, and was very generous in giving me a quote for the book. I didn't see Roger and Me in that theater, but that was obviously a instrumental film to me coming from Michigan. So those were some of the films that really got me going.
I'm curious, what were the fiction films that stood out to you in your childhood? For me, it was like Citizen Kane, which was the film that made me want to be a filmmaker. I had very little interest in documentary
Yeah.
until I saw Sherman's March. So what was were there any? I often ask, editors that I interview what their fiction favorites are because it gives me insight into their aesthetic. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
What I mean, in the 1980s, I would go see any movie that came out, and uh, certainly a lot of the Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and those films of that era, the science fiction films. I read science fiction film magazines and magazines. I remember there's a magazine I think still exists called Cinefex that will go very deep dive into how special effects were done, and it was reading those long articles were way beyond my understanding, but somehow I would, I'd read them start to finish because it was just like a way of getting closer to that. I mean, back there on that bookshelf is um, the book Hitchcock Truffaut, which was a major work for me on movie making, and kind of off to the side. So that line of books there, that is almost all books on uh, movies, including a lot of books of film criticism, the works of Stanley Kaufman, John Simon. These were books I would go to at the library, and many of those films were films that I hadn't seen, but but really opened me up to the range of films, international films, documentary films, and so in putting together Mondo Documentary, it was very much a kind of return to the books that had opened up my film understanding.
So did you ever aspire? I mean, you eventually became a documentary producer and director yourself. Did you always aspire to make documentaries as a filmmaker? Or did you entertain the notion of being what I call fictitious filmmaker?
Made up films.
Yes.
I, I um, there are kind of three chapters to my career, which I talk about in the introduction. And that introduction was the first time that I ever had a chance to really lay them all out and try to remind myself how one connects to another, and share with other people how one connects to the other. So those three chapters are: after high school, I moved to California and went to work for the comic book publisher Fantagraphics Books. And I was spent about 7 years in publishing instead of going to college. Then I moved to New York in my mid 20s and spent 10 years making documentary films. And then for the last 20 years, I've been working at festivals and other kind of programming roles around documentary films. So um, the so when I was a teenager, the things that excited me most were books and movies. But when I was 18, the idea of getting to movies from suburban Detroit, felt akin to like becoming an astronaut. I mean, I just did not know how I would possibly go about that. Publishing was more accessible to me, and the 1980s was the era of fanzines. You could be a publisher with access to a Xerox machine, um, and and what was happening at Fantagraphics Books and their flagship titles magazine called the Comics Journal. Um, that was that was super exciting, and I knew their address because it was published in their publications. And so I bought a one-way ticket to California and showed up at their doorstep and talked my way into an internship that became a job there. So that so I kind of went to publishing first because it seemed accessible. By the mid 90s, suddenly film felt more accessible, and I was a little bit older, and I had more entrepreneurial experience in publishing, and had yeah, I felt that I could now take that on. Uh, to answer your question about documentary versus fiction, documentary, when I went to New York in 1994, documentary was very much at the top of my agenda. But I did spend first job I got was at a company called Elevator Pictures with Rocky Collins, and they were doing documentaries and also producing some fiction. And so I did work on a couple fiction films, and this was, the heyday of independent fiction in New York City. A spirit that's captured in your film, Doug, The Heck with Hollywood, and the experiences I had working on independent fiction films. Uh, uh, where it was really hard work, and it was hard to make those films turn out well, and at the end of the process I would feel like, wow, I spent a lot of months working on that film, and it's a film that um, I don't feel great about what the results are. Um, Whereas the times I'd spent making a documentary, um, whether the film turned out as great or not, the time I would spend on it was rewarding time. I worked on a TV documentary about a veterinarian hospital called Animal ER. It's not a film that is going to go into anyone's canon of documentary film, but that was 2 months of spending time in Philadelphia, like in an animal hospital. It just it felt like that was worthwhile time, whatever the film was. So I've had a couple inflection points in my life where I thought, well, maybe I should try to do more with fiction film. That happened when Raphael and I moved to Montclair, New Jersey, and helped start the Montclair Film Festival 14 years ago. And for the 3 years that I was the artistic director of the Montclair Film Festival, I thought, well, maybe it's good for me to kind of just get out of the lane of documentary film and program more fiction films. But after 3 years of doing that, I felt like, documentary is really what I love, and that's where I belong.
At what point in the here did you meet Mima and start a company with her, Mima Spadola?
My first, my 10-year filmmaking partner, Mima Spadola, the first film we made that was acquired by HBO was called Breasts, that Mima directed, interviewing women about their breasts, and then we did one that we co-directed called Private Dicks, Men Exposed for HBO, interview men about their penises, and so on. And so Mima, I met when I moved to New York in 1994, and we, were both young strivers who wanted to make films, and Mima had actually, studied film in college at Sarah Lawrence and had made a short film called My Mother's Secret about her own experience as the daughter of a lesbian and other kids who had gay and lesbian parents, which, when Mima made that film in the early 1990s, was, a rarely discussed phenomenon. So when we met, like between us, that we had that film that she had made to show what we might do, and Mima was then she'd worked as a production assistant on like a Hal Hartley film and some other films. She was then working as an associate producer for the new FX channel, which is a very different channel back then than it is now. And she had, a kind of, good student mentality that this is how you climb the film ladder. Is you work as a production assistant, then you work as an associate producer, and then maybe someone hires you for a better job, and and some day down the road you might be able to direct or produce something. And I had coming from the do-it-yourself world of independent publishing, my feeling was the way you become a producer is that you produce something, and you don't wait for someone to give you permission or give you money. You just do it. That was a combination that worked. And I have to say, throughout my career, I've had some very meaningful partnerships the last nearly 20 years with my wife, Rafaela, who's, together we helped start DOC NYC with IFC Center and helped start the Montclair Film Festival and do all kinds of other things. Those partnerships, without them, I wouldn't have been able to do anything.
Why did you stop becoming a filmmaker? I mean, what disillusioned you about music?
So we had been doing it for 10 years, and we had started with this kind of early success. We'd made this documentary Breasts on our own, really thinking like we'd be lucky if we play a few film festivals, but it got bought by Sheila Evans, and was a bona fide success for Cinemax and HBO at the time, and I thought that, okay, well, this is the bottom run, and we'll just kind of keep on, climbing higher from here, and but spent the next 8 years, coming to learn just how hard that is to do, how hard it is to repeat success, and I think within those 8 years, I always felt like, oh, if I just do this, then I'll turn the corner. And after 8 years, I kind of realized, well, there isn't there isn't a corner that is waiting for me to turn to make this work. The other thing um, is that I um, after 10 years of doing it, I kind of had a reevaluation for myself of, what is it that I really love about documentary filmmaking? And for me, that was showing the film to an audience. I worked with people who are great camera people, and they have terrific satisfaction at the end of the day from just looking through the lens and capturing images. And whatever happens after that is gravy for them because they had a great day shooting. I know people who are tremendous editors, and spending a week in the edit room and taking a disparate bunch of footage and turning it into a scene is its own satisfaction. Um, and for me, I had neither of those skill sets, really. I feel a lot more frustration out of a day of shooting, looking at footage and thinking, oh, I didn't get that. That's overlit. So many other people do this better than me. And editing, I feel I have more um, aptitude for, but I don't have like the power to sit in a chair for 8 or more hours each day, day after day, staying focused. I'm more restless than it takes to do that job. Um, but the job that I did enjoy was everything that's involved with taking a film and like figuring out who the audience is, and how do you push that film out into the world. How do you get the right journalists to write about it, or the festival programmers to program it, or other influencers to help open doors of distribution. um, those were uh, that's the kind of stuff that never gets taught in film school, in my experience. In film school, like the lessons kind of end when you have wrapped the film, when post-production is over, and your film is done. Um, but I came to realize that that's really a halfway mark in the life of a film, and the other half is getting it out into the world. Um, and understandably, many filmmakers, when they finish that, when they lock picture, they they're out of energy. It took everything they had to get to that point, and the idea that you're only halfway through it, and then like now you have to put in this new set of energy to bring your film out to audiences. A lot of people, I knew didn't have that in them. Um, and so that was exciting to me. And, I kind of felt like, I was part of this big community in New York City through organizations like D-Word, or Docu Club that Susan Kaplan was a co-founder of. Um, I could see all these people who were making films, and struggling with the like getting them to audience part of the process. And I felt like that's what would excite me. Look, in a very specific way, I can remember in 2005, the year I made this transition and started the Stranger Than Fiction series at IFC Center. Um, I knew a lot of filmmakers, including you, Doug, who would have a film at Sundance or at the Toronto Film Festival or South by Southwest, or and that would be a great moment. And then that filmmaker would come back. The filmmakers I knew in the community of New York City would come back to New York and be like, "All right, now I just showed my film in Utah. Now I'd like to show it in New York." And and maybe the film isn't sold to a distributor yet, so and the distributors I wanted to see it didn't get to see it in Park City because their attention was divided between so many other things. So now what do I do? And for a long time, the option was, well, you pay some more money and rent a theater and try to get those distributors and press to come see your movie. But in 2005, the IFC Center had just opened, and I proposed to the general manager, John Vanko, that I could, I knew a lot of filmmakers who are looking for opportunities to show their films. And instead of doing one-off screenings, we could have a series. Every Tuesday night, people would know that there's a new documentary being shown, or sometimes an old documentary when we'd show classics. And instead of you paying several $100s to rent a theater, I could give you an honorarium to show your movie. So the very first edition of Stranger Than Fiction in September 2005 was 51 Birch Street, 2 weeks after it played at had its world premiere at the Toronto Film Festival before I worked at the Toronto Film Festival. And I remember thinking, like, if I could fill half the theater, this would be a great success. And the theater sold out that night. I was turning people away. So that is that's the kind of nutshell version of my transition from filmmaking to programming.
Yeah, and I remember hanging out with you for quite a while at the Toronto Film Festival that year when you were between jobs and your future was uncertain. And it was a really interesting time because, a year later you were the artistic director of documentaries there. So that was quite stunning. But I'm really impressed with this idea of the need to have a place to, exhibit our film, to premiere our film. Way too many festivals, are dependent on a world premiere. It's very frustrating for filmmakers. And what was great about Stranger Than Fiction was that it didn't really interfere with, waiting on that all valuable world premiere. I remember when you and Raphael were guests a couple of years ago here and talking a lot about Doc NYC. And it really stood out to me the opportunity you've given to so many filmmakers to present the film, that you've gotten criticism, or Doc NYC has gotten criticism, I think quite unfairly, about how big it is. But in my mind, it gives an opportunity for so many filmmakers to, to get their films out. Now, there is and it doesn't require world premiere status. I mean, you can't for the documentary competition, yes, but there's so many other strands to it. So I just want to get into that a little bit about uh, do you feel like you're criticized unfairly for, rather than curating a very, small but distinct festival, you take great pride in being North America's largest documentary festival.
I don't know. I'm not sure. North America Hot Docs for a long time was a larger festival. Now Hot Docs is has shrunk. I mean, look, the Doc NYC, um, you know, by its fourth year, had grown to be showing more documentaries than any other festival in the United States, and we took on that line of America's largest documentary festival, which is a kind of New Yorky, boastful spirit
Shameless promotion.
that I appreciate. Had some people wrinkling their nose, and in fact, I think the festival has kind of reduced that slogan over the years. But look, um, for me, like I always want to like build a bigger tent for documentary films, and I think a big learning experience for me from doing Stranger Than Fiction to doing Doc NYC is that at Stranger Than Fiction, I really thought of the audience as a documentary community, which might be a flawed concept in itself, but the people who are coming out to Stranger Than Fiction, I would say, a large core of them were people who were filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers, and when when we got Doc NYC going, I guess I was kind of thinking that was that it was the same community, but I quickly realized that we needed to think more creatively and bigger than that, because each one of these films had their own community that was important to reach, and I think in New York City there's a limitless number of communities. People who will come out to see a film, about a Bangladeshi story at Doc NYC may only be interested in that film, and that's great. And if they, and if while they're there they happen to pick up a catalog and become interested in something else, even better. But in showing over 100 feature documentaries, we're not even covering all the possible communities that we could in New York City. So, I think that more is more when it comes to showing films.
So talk about when in this timeline, the TIFF job came along, and um, your
Yeah, how did that
relationship with
happen?
Noah Cowan and his impact on you.
Yeah, so the it's right. The introduction to the book was um, a chance to uh, really reflect on the people who had made it possible for me to do what I do today. And so earlier I mentioned John Vanko, who gave me a yes at IFC Center. And the other key figure to that path was Noah Cowan, who was the co-director of the Toronto Film Festival in 2006. Previously, I'd known him in New York City because he and John Vanko, coincidentally or not coincidentally, ran a small distribution company called Cowboy Pictures that had many notable documentary successes, including The Life and Times of Hank Greenberg by Aviva Kempner, and Jem Cohen's film Benjamin Smoke, and they were an eclectic small distribution company. Cowboy Pictures, ended sometime in the early 2000s, and John Vanko went into his role at IFC Center, and Noah Cowan went back to Toronto, where he was from, to become co-director of the Toronto Film Festival. And Noah and I had stayed in touch over those years, and Noah had seen from afar what was happening with Stranger Than Fiction. And so in December 2005, when they had an opening for the documentary programmer at Toronto, Noah said to me, we have this job and I think you should apply for it. And that's the story. So Noah, some people may know, passed away 2 years ago of a brain tumor, really the same thing that took the life of Jess Search a year or so ago. But both Noah and Jess were about my age, and when Noah had about a year of living with a terminal diagnosis, and he had very few regrets. But one of the things that he did express to me is that in the life of a festival programmer, you're kind of geared to like looking forward. What's the next crop of films? What's new? What's next? What's new? And it didn't leave time for looking back. And in the case, when Noah died 2 years ago, I felt a lot of frustration that I had a hard time, and I still have a hard time explaining to people the significance that Noah had and all kinds of different filmmaking communities over the last 30 years. And something that I think would make a difference is to have all the different pieces of writing that Noah did in film festival catalogs or for Filmmaker magazine or other places to bring those together. So as I was approaching the 20th anniversary of my time at Toronto this year, I thought about what Noah said about looking back, and that was a real motivation for doing this book.
You take great pride in discovering great documentaries. So I wonder if you, instead of naming you name some of your favorite or early influences on you of documentaries. Are there some documentaries that come to mind that we might not know of that we should?
I mean, there are, I know that everyone watching this, is a dedicated documentary viewer, and probably feels like they see most of what comes out. Um, but you know, I bet that there's 100 films in this book that you haven't seen. And those are, there's 350 films in this book of films that I showed at TIFF over the last 20 years. And let's think for a moment about, how um, unique it is to be able to get into TIFF. There's this year we had 1,000 documentaries that submitted to TIFF, feature-length documentaries. I personally chose 14. My other colleagues, feed in other films. We probably showed about 30 documentaries in total at TIFF this year, and that's the way it's been for all my 20 years. To be selected at a festival, your film is standing out amongst hundreds. And some of those films, have gone on to win Oscars, like a Free Solo or Inside Job, and some have gone on to wider distribution on a Netflix or Neon, or but a lot of those films that were special enough to be selected, did not have those breaks. And in compiling this book, for me it was a kind of a one-stop place for people who are very curious about documentary films to make some discoveries of their own. I mean, also I should say, frequently people ask me, like, oh, I'm working on a personal documentary, like, can you recommend something? Or I'm working on a historical documentary or an essayistic documentary, or what should I watch to feed my inspiration? And every time I get that question, I'm like kind of cobbling together a list from scratch, and now I feel like, get this book. You can dive in and explore over 350 films to see what you might draw some inspiration from.
This is a good time to remind folks that in a few minutes, we'll open it up to your questions for Thom. So if you start using the raised hand function, if you do, and line up, we'll have somebody passing the microphone around. And thanks, hi. Great, already. So just a few more minutes for me. And then I will just call on folks. So let's talk about the industry today, and do you feel that it's as grim as everyone's making it out to be? What depresses you about what's going on now? What gives you hope?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Like, that's not your imagination. If you look around and feel like, wait a second, there aren't the same distribution opportunities, and there's funding places have closed, and all that is real. 100%, you're not being gaslit. It's a difficult situation. Is it more difficult than it was 20 years ago when I was making films? No, I think it's still a better situation today than it was 20 years ago. Like, we have amazing tools that I could have only dreamed about when I was making films, to make films, to connect with audiences, to uh, you know, connect with audiences directly, if whether it's a YouTube channel or a Substack newsletter. You can be in control of your own audience, and when uh, when I was making films for an HBO, say, like it would go out on HBO, and I would never know who the people were that saw that. I would never have the ability to capture their emails or have a dialogue with them or enlist their enthusiasm and support to make my next film. So. Um, I think we're living through a whiplash moment right now because there was, um, uh, because the, things were there are many positive things in the last 10 years for documentary films. There was, uh, a more money being spent, more people being put to work, uh, and um, and now that's contracted, and it's contracted because the whole media industry has contracted, um, and uh, uh, and do we know what's going to replace it? No, I don't know what's going to replace it, nor does anyone know what's going to replace it. So it's a it's an unsettling time. There's a lot of new people who entered this industry in the last 10 years, and they're and the number of jobs that existed, even 5 years ago, have shrunk dramatically. You know, Lots of people are going to have to figure out something else, and uh, that sadly has been like a long time state of documentary filmmaking. Is like you had to figure out what your other um, you know, money making thing was, whether it's, shooting wedding videos or, renting yourself out as a camera person or an editor or, doing commercials or, you know, um, when I used to teach at NYU and I'd bring um, filmmakers in, I would, say to my students, like, I could bring in 50 filmmakers and you'd hear 50 different ways of like how to, um, what their side hustle is. And the frustration about those 50 different ways is most of them aren't replicable. One person's side hustle is not something that you can like go out and do yourself because it's a unique thing that they've figured out. Um, so, um, so the thing that causes me optimism is that uh, that spirit of making films against the odds um, has always existed, and continues to exist. I mean, this year at TIFF we got 1,000 documentary film submissions. So the independent film community is doing its job, going out and making these films. We just need more help in the distribution and marketing community. And one of the things that I feel needs to happen is um, you know, I think it's natural for people who get excited about documentary films to channel that energy into wanting to make documentary films. That's, the first direction that I went in. But, I would say, to kind of think more broadly, and is there a way you can channel your enthusiasm for documentary films into serving them in some other way, and helping this body of work that exists reach audiences? Because that's a place. I frequently get asked, like, oh, do you know a good impact producer, or do you know a good person who can help me with marketing my film? Um, and it's pretty short lists of people who have built up expertise at doing those things. Um, uh, but we could we could really use it. I mean, I think this year, I've watched the company Watermelon Pictures that that grew out of a desire to showcase Palestinian films, because they saw real shortcomings in distribution for those films. And that company has been doing tremendous things this year. I'm constantly impressed by the choices they're making, and so. I would love to see more people putting energy out that way.
Two final questions for you before I go to call on others. You have been, well, I consider you actually kind of an unsung hero for all that you contribute to the documentary community, but you've been called a power broker, which is both a criticism and a compliment. How do you feel about your influence? And do you feel a kind of responsibility to dole it out well?
um, uh, I think, I mean, I've been kind of driven by trying to create opportunities that that I wanted more as a filmmaker. So that started with Stranger Than Fiction. It grew to Doc NYC. It grew to doing a podcast, Pure Nonfiction. Years ago, when AJ Schnock had the idea to start the Cinema Eye Honors, he asked me to help him, and so at each part of that journey, I've been driven by the idea of, like, well, what would I want if I was a filmmaker? I'd want a chance to show my films in New York City. I'd want a chance to be on a podcast. I'd want a chance to be in an awards program that champions all these crafts of cinematography, editing, composing, etc. And when it comes to the programming side of things, they're particularly in a highly competitive space like Toronto, where we're getting 1,000 submissions and have space for about 30 documentaries. A big part of the job is letting people down, and some of those people I was able to give a different opportunity for at Doc NYC. If I didn't have space for a film at Toronto, maybe we'd have space for it at Doc NYC. There's lots of films. There are lots of good films that any festival doesn't have space for, and I always try to do my best to give whatever guidance I can to a film that I really believe in, even if I don't have space to show it.
Final question. AI is like really disrupting Hollywood and the fiction film world. Do you think it will have anywhere near that kind of disruptive force in documentary, given how documentary filmmakers go about making their films? And is it going to come after your job?
Um, uh, uh, I don't know about AI, in programming a film festival. Um, I guess we'll wait to see what happens
Let's
there.
talk
I
again
mean,
next year, Tom.
yeah, exactly. Um, I think. I mean, look, it's a hugely transformative in good and bad ways to everything in our world. Um, so it would be um, bizarre to think that somehow documentary film is going to be exempt from that. Um, I mean, I can think of ways in which there are positive sides to it. When I had to do the index to this book, the first pass we did with AI, which was a lot faster than doing it by hand. But the second pass I did, just showed me how um, uh, you know poor AI is at replacing a human because there was lots of errors that needed human correction. But it did save me some time. I don't know. I mean, they're good questions to ask. I would be um, lying if I thought I had the crystal ball to understand exactly where this is going. I mean, I think there's lots of disruptive things um, to documentary film, including people's attention span. Um, is the 90-minute film um, the way that most people want to take in stories today? Um, you know, um, uh, I still have a lot of love for that format, but there's a rising generation that might feel differently.
Yeah, good, great point. Um, all right, Hailey, why don't you kick it off?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, Tom, for all you do for the documentary community. It's like a really cool opportunity to be able to like speak to you. So I've been editing for like the past 5 years, and I just this year finished my first short doc that I've directed. And I'm experiencing what you just talked about in terms of like, okay, after the edit's done, there's this whole other process of these festival submissions, and I'm starting that process now. And I've talked to a few friends, a few producers who've had success in getting into big festivals, but something they said, a constant like tip I've gotten is like, oh, all these festivals get so many submissions. A cold submission is mm, they're trying to like cushion it, but they're kind of like it's probably like not gonna happen. And how we're kind of in a stage where, um, one of the questions they always ask is like, is it affiliated with a production house? Like, do you have a festival producer or like an executive producer with ties with festivals that can like get you in through the black back door and stuff? And I was just wondering like if you felt like there's truth to that statement, I
Well, yeah,
guess.
yeah. So I think that I think it's important to build the network around you of knowledgeable people, and that some of those people may be officially working with you as a producer or, a sales agent, which is kind of less likely with a short film. But, your network can also just include, friends I mean, D-Word is its own network, and um, and having people who know this world's, better than you do because they've been around longer and they kind of have a sense of what the tastes of film festivals are. That can help demystify a little bit of it. Um, uh, you know, as the question of like, when I'm looking at film festival submissions at Toronto, does it, uh, does it matter whether it's coming from a sales agent or from or from the filmmaker themselves? I mean, not really. I say no to lots of films that are submitted by, big distributors and even alumni of the festival if I just don't think they're right for us this year. And I'm super excited to find a film by a first-time director that that I think is going to connect to audiences. So I think that. So I don't think it. And I think that any film festival programmer that I know of, wants to discover new filmmakers and wants to discover something that lights them up. And the harder thing is to make a film that stands out above all the rest. Something often when I'm looking at films for Toronto, say, I see a film that I think like, oh, that's a really good film. But it's a good film that reminds me of something I showed last year, or it's, I mean, to give an example, this year, we probably had about a dozen films submitted about the war in Ukraine. And I selected one called A Simple Soldier that stood out to me for its qualities amongst the rest. And that's nothing against the other dozen or so films that were submitted. They'll have pathways at other film festivals, and they have an important place in the world to shine a light on different aspects of that conflict. But that is a dynamic. I mean, often a film that we pass on is not a judgment on the film so much as it's a judgment on what we're looking for our specific festival.
Thanks for the question, Hailey, and addressing it, Tom, because just
Doug, you're muted, or I'm not hearing you. Maybe that's my fault.
I can hear you.
Okay, I don't.
Now, can other people hear Doug? I
don't see myself as muted, so will people shake their head if they're
You're
hearing?
good, Doug.
I can hear you now. It might have been my earphone.
Yeah, I was just saying that I appreciated the question and you're addressing it because so many filmmakers on the D-Word and approach me, or I've had conversations with are just have this belief that they have to have a well-known producer or a celebrity to get it into an important festival. And I keep saying that they love to discover unknowns. They take great pride in introducing the world to a great new filmmaker. So appreciate that. Anyway, Tommy, you're up.
Thank you so much. Oh man, this is one of my favorites. And Tom, I love your Detroit origin story as a kid from the Cleveland area. Like it's so relatable. I just love it. And highly perfect lead off. Like thanks. You helped shorten this. So Tom, if you would please address like communicating with festivals after you've submitted, like how appropriate or inappropriate is that, whether it's the filmmaker doing that. I'm a first timer, so like everything is brand new, or having influencers reach out. And I'm like, one of my particular terrors is like, what if I get into some of these A-list festivals and then that conflicts with a B for a premiere? How does that communication work, and how do I not look like an idiot
Yeah.
doing it?
So first of all, I think it's great if you have someone that's not the director doing that communication. Can be a producer, can be, doesn't have to be an agent, can just be a friend of the project. And the reason is that because most of the answers I'm giving are disappointing ones. It's easier for me to be frank with someone who's not the director. It's because I can appreciate, from having been a director myself, that there's a lot of emotion tied up in having that conversation. And as in the summer, when I'm going through hundreds of films for Toronto, I don't have time to give everyone detailed feedback. But sometimes there's there's a couple sentences I can say, like, hey, I thought the first half of this film was great, and then I didn't understand the ending. And it's way easier for me to communicate that to a producer or a friend of the project than to the director. So I do think having an emissary is great. And then how much kind of further interaction can you do? Look, I think having one check-in, like you send your film off to TIFF by the deadline in early May, and then you have someone write a note that says, hey, I know you're from Detroit and we just submitted this film about Cleveland. Please keep an eye out for it. I don't mind receiving that note. It's kind of helpful as we track hundreds of films, to have a little nudge to bring something to my attention. And then say by late June, you get an offer for a smaller Midwest festival that takes place in August, and you don't know what to do because you're still hoping that you might get into TIFF, but you don't want to say no to the other Midwest festival if there's no chance you're get into TIFF. Then by all means, send that email that says, hey, listen, I know your official communications don't happen for a few more weeks, but we're in this situation. We've got this invite. Of course, we would love to play a TIFF, but we don't want to say no to this other opportunity if that's not possible. And I will make my best effort to answer those. If I'm not answering those, it's just because I'm like purely overwhelmed with the amount of work. But I think those kinds of communications are, totally valid. And if you, if you have someone come on board your project as an executive producer, share that too. I mean, it's not totally inconsequential, to have those kinds of attachments. I mean, it doesn't. I'm not going to take a film that I don't like simply because there's a celebrity executive producer, but if there's a film that that I like, and I find out that there's a celebrity executive producer who might really like raise the attention level on this film, that's interesting to know.
Great. Peter.
Hey, hi. Good to see you again, Tom. And congrats on your book. That's fantastic. I sure do miss the STFs on Tuesday night, though. I'm no longer living in New York City, so no Joe's Pizza before or after. Anyway, I'm kind of a rogue in this community because I've moved off of making a documentary film out of the projects I'm working on, and I've gone for YouTube. So I've made a series on YouTube, 5, 10, 15 minute, like that. And what I'm seeing is more and more film festivals have either a virtual component or more going purely virtual, purely online. Do you see that evolving as a replacement for some of the big some of the big festivals like Hot Docs? Where do you see those virtual festivals going?
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, the rise of the virtual festivals came out of necessity in during the pandemic years when we couldn't meet in person, and when that ended, the Toronto Film Festival, for instance, pulled back on having a virtual component. Doc NYC still has a virtual component. You can watch most Doc NYC films anywhere in the country, and I mean, I personally love that added accessibility, because if I was, still living in suburban Detroit and, watching Doc NYC from afar and wanting to see those films, I love the chance to be able to see them. I still think that there's something extra meaningful about coming together in person to watch a film. So I don't think that I don't think virtual festivals are going to replace that, but I think there's space for both of them.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Bill. Unmute, sir. There you go. I think. No, you're muted. Maybe you're not set up for audio, right? Well, I'll get back to you, Bill. Why don't you work on that? I'll come back. Christine?
Yeah, hi, and thank you so much for this. First, on the virtual festivals, one of the things I think is key is for the virtual not to overlap with the actual festival, because there's a potential that you'll cannibalize the in-person. It's just my thought, having seen, with Sundance, and, it's just sort of to me, it's like to be able to have them dovetail each other, or maybe at the end when the audience goes down. It's just a short thought. But anyway, I am I'm a first-time director, and what and also thinking about shorter timeframes and impact is, well, one question is, you mentioned a very few good impact producers, and to me, my film really started with the idea of impact. So I'm curious about that. And then also in terms of shorter attention spans and impact, what I'm doing is, and I'm just curious on your thoughts on it. We're finishing the film. We're in post now. I'm planning to apply, submit for next year. But what I'm doing now is I've created these, and I put it in the chat, but I created these screening events. So like at the National Coalition for the Homeless's annual conference coming up next month, we're going to be presenting a screening event, which is part excerpts from filming and part panel, and then open conversation as opposed to Q&A, so that there's a level playing field, because a lot of times what's in the audience is just as interesting, and to be able to connect everybody. So so I'm just sort of curious if you've seen that, and also again on impact campaigns, because to me that's a really important part of what we're doing. My film's about the housing crisis, but looking at it through success stories of people who have moved into housing and all the amazing things they're doing. So yeah, but would love your thoughts on impact in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, I think the wonderful thing about impact producing is it's carving different pathways to reach audiences, and film festivals are this one pathway that reaches a certain demographic of people, and often leaves out other demographics because the film festival is interacting with them, or people think of a film festival as one thing. They think like I must need a pass to go there, or and so I think the the growth of impact producing, which maybe goes back 15 years at least in my mind, and it has been happening longer than that under different names, is tremendous, and is kind of tailored to whatever your particular subject matter is, which is why I feel a little at a loss for being able to fully answer your question about the demographic and the communities that that you may want to be reaching with this film. But I do think in general, I would say, particularly to people who feel like, I have 3 months of rejection slips from film festivals. That, well, film festivals is one pathway, and if you're not finding love for your project there, like look at the different pathways. Like, look at who your audience is, and maybe your audience is not people who would go to a film festival anyway. So where are the places that your audience gathers? Are they in faith communities? Are they in schools?
Right. We'd be doing both, but do you have, who do you think are really good impact producers from what you've seen in your world?
That I would, if I was to answer that question, or if I was to ask that question for myself, I'd go to D-Word and put that out to the D-Word community. I think you'd find a bigger and more reliable hive mind there than me. I wish I had more expertise in that, but I don't.
Put it in the chat. Ask in the chat, Christine. Okay, Barbara.
Right,
well, then we'll try Bill again, and that will be our final 2 questions.
All right, can you hear me this time?
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Bill. Yeah.
Perfect. Tom, thanks for your time, and thanks, Doug, for your patience with I don't know what happened on my phone. In the festivals like Toronto or DOCS NYC, is there an ability for something that is partially faith-based to get into one of those, or is it something better just put right into the subgenre immediately?
I think it's a hard question to answer abstractly. Um, uh, um, you know, film festivals are often geared towards, uh, you know, showcase, to thinking about film from, an artistic standpoint, a craft standpoint. What is this film? Is this film doing something new in documentary? Um, and and there are plenty of like important films that connect to audiences for whom that isn't their agenda. They're not trying to reinvent the documentary form with their film. They're trying to tell a good story or convey information that's going to connect with the community. So if you know where your community is, if you're making a faith-based film and a faith-based community that's going to be able to get this film out there, then you may just want to start there. I mean, it's not that these things are mutually exclusive. Like you can also try some film festivals and then try this other outlet. But the film festival process has come out, frequently in this conversation can be one of like waiting, of feeling like a decision is out of your hands. And for some people, that is going to be a worthwhile process to go through, because certain film festivals do give you an exposure and an audience and connection to film critics and distributors that would be very hard to get on your own. But there are many other ways to find your audience.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks. Finally, Barbara.
Hello, everyone. This is my first time. I'm an Australian veteran documentary filmmaker, and I'm living in Ann Arbor at the moment. And my question is about films from a retrospective point of view. And I think the thing about documentaries is that when we make them, the impact of them, and if you're a social issue filmmaker, which I am, investigating the reasons for why such and such happened, it gets date stamped. So at the moment, I'm looking back literally 40 years to having made a film called Witch Hunt, which was a 16mm feature-length documentary that got a good review in Variety. And the subject matter is about how the government effectively, one morning, a bit like ICE, sent out police to arrest 200 migrants whom they accused of being part of an international conspiracy.
Barbara, I'm going to cut in.
government
I'm going to
off.
cut in a little bit here because
Yep.
we're over time.
Okay.
So can you get to
So
a
getting to the point,
Yeah, please.
that film would be relevant today, more so almost than, and in an American audience, than it was at the time. So I'm wondering how you look at films
Yeah.
from a retrospective point of view.
I mean, I think about this a lot in writing Mondo Documentary, or compiling these 350 films, because I think if everyone stopped making documentary films for the next 5 years, like we'd all have plenty of films to go back and rewatch and rediscover, and be able to constantly nourished on all the great films that are out there. So, and I think that we're living in an age of, constantly refresh, what's new, what's new, what's new, and it does make us lose sight of what's already there. I think the success of a platform like Criterion Channel shows that there's an audience that wants to kind of look backward and celebrate all the riches from past decades, and going back to something I was saying earlier about people who want to bring their energy to documentary film. Instead of making them, there's a world of documentaries out there that need champions, need people programming them in theaters, or finding new ways on social media, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, to bring these films to light and connect them to audiences, and connect them to audiences in a way where some revenue can flow back to the filmmaker. I think that we're at a moment of kind of regrouping as a film community and figuring out, what do we need to do to create a more sustainable practice, and find ways for films to connect audiences. That includes films that may have been made 40 years ago, and it includes films that are just being finished today. So, I hope in my book Mondo Documentary you might take some pointers from the journey that I had, and I hope that I hope that the book will give encouragement to other people to to find ways to serve documentary filmmakers in addition to making documentaries yourselves.
Well, I cannot. I recently started a Substack newsletter called Getting Personal with Doug Block. I can't hold it up like a book, but it's so interesting because it's actually kind of forced me to look back more than I anticipated on my career. And I was telling Thom before we began that we had very similar career paths, but for quirks of fate, I might have gone down a similar path of curation. It was always fascinating to me. So anyway, I was reminded of this reading Thom's book, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. I'm really glad we had this opportunity to talk about it. And
what if I can say one more thing about the book? So, this is a self-published effort. I had the idea in April and was able to get it out by September. It was partly made possible because I have a friend who created a self-publishing platform called Stack, STCK, and the book is not available on Amazon. Intentionally, it is built to be a DIY model, and because I wanted to continue to have connection to the people who are interested in it, I've chosen to go that model. But you can buy it anywhere in the world. If it's a really interesting print-on-demand technology. So if you buy it in the US, it'll be printed and shipped to you from the US. If you buy it in the UK, it'll be printed and shipped to you from the UK or Latin America and Latin America or India and India. So it's a, I've found myself over the years talking more and more about ways in which filmmakers can, take the tools of distribution into their own hand. And I felt, for this book project, I would kind of, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk in trying to take those things into my own hands.
A really good question in the chat. Is a digital version available?
Not yet, but probably in 2026.
Okay, and we're all sitting down, I think. What's the price?
Is $24.99.
Excellent. Actually, it's really interesting that you're doing this kind of DIY distribution of it. Anyway, as I was saying, it's a great book. Couldn't recommend it more highly. And thanks so much for being here, Thom.
Thank you to everyone for joining us today.